My name is Alex. Question is open to both, but somewhat more focused to Mr. Murray. In your book, you refer a lot to the dichotomy of identities between Eastern Europe and Western Europe. My family is from Eastern Europe, from Romania, where we have a very deep relationship to perhaps not being particularly observant in religion, but being Eastern Orthodox. Many of our saints fall into very much this idea of protecting Europe from the Ottoman attack, for which we, for hundreds of years, were both subject to, 500 years, and fought against. And it's this new type of narrative that we do speak about. I'd like to get some more impressions on not only how you see that as a potential solution. You speak specifically about Slovakia and Poland, I reckon. Poland is doing a little bit different thing right now at the moment with their history. But if you see a solution in this sort of not necessarily virulent nationalism that we experience in the 90s in places like Yugoslavia, but rather, do you see as a corrective model in Western European identities by saying, as you say, sort of revisit the paths that you've developed from potentially in a church?
That's a very interesting question. Basically, for this book, I as well as traveling for some years to a lot of the countries that people have been fleeing from, both as asylum seekers and as economic migrants, I'd also spent recent years traveling across the continent from north to south, east to west, meeting a lot of migrants, for instance, who just come off the boats, the Greek and Italian islands, speaking to a lot of refugees, migrants, and so on, and following the conversations all the way up to the chancelleries of Europe. And yes, you're right. I came to the decision that the recognition fairly early on that there was a totally different view in the former Eastern European countries and the Western European countries. And look, this could all get very messy. I have no doubt about that, and I'm aware of what in some of these countries not very distant history has been, and we're always walking on precipices of some kind. My view is that the reason why they have a totally different view towards mass migration and other related issues is because not only they had a history for hundreds of years fighting with the Ottoman Empire, pushing them back from the gates of Vienna and much more, but because of what I think of as the 20th century issue. We in Britain, like you in America, we never had the Nazis in our country. They made it to the Channel Islands in the UK, but we didn't see populations rounded up and sent to the death camps. And
you did see a lot of bombs, though.
We saw a lot of bombs, it's true. And these things do remain in the memory for a long time, and rightly so. And my view is that Eastern Europe learnt one of the worst things imaginable, which is that you can have your entire country and your culture destroyed from one direction, and just as you think you might get above the surface and breathe, it gets totally destroyed from another direction. To have lived under fascism and communism in the space of a few decades, and to have only come out of it quite recently, is bound to have an effect on you that is different from your view of the world if you were born and brought up in New Jersey. It's going to affect it, and I suppose the thing it comes down to for me is this: is that, and I am broadly in agreement with what some of the countries in Eastern Europe have done in recent years in this regard. I think they know what I think was being a very important lesson, which is to be careful with your present and to be careful with your future, and not to carry out experiments on your country that you don't know how they'll turn out. Just to be careful with your future, because you don't know. You could screw it all up in new ways. And in Western Europe, there's a lot of things we're coming across which we never expected to come across because we hadn't planned, and it didn't mean any of it to happen. And I think in Eastern Europe they have a different view. So I just say that it's not an argument for people being illiberal or being anti-democratic or anything like it. I think people should be very careful, because this is, for most people, the only vessel they have to live in. And if it's screwed up, you've screwed up the only thing they've got. So be careful. This doesn't seem to me to be a very extreme position, but sadly it's regarded by some as being so. But I at any rate still hold to it.
Yeah, and for clarity, because I've heard you talk about this before, you're not anti-immigration.
No.
You are...
I'm anti-totally unbounded and unrestricted and uncontrolled people walking in, just, flowing in on boats without anyone knowing who they are, by, as happened in 2015, the millions. And I've seen the strain it puts on societies. I've seen the strain it puts on the liberals. And it's going to be very difficult.
And I'm curious, thank you for your question, by the way.
Yeah, thank you very much. And also, I'm deeply honored to have gotten a ticket to be here tonight. And
Well, likewise, thank you.
thank you.
I'm a little bit of a I don't even know what the right word is. From a pragmatic standpoint, I understand there are nations and borders, and there are good practical reasons to make sure that we're not just, having wide open borders that anybody can cross and we don't know what's going on and where all this. On the other hand, in the purely impractical utopian sense, I have no actual objection to a one world government, a one planet community where we are about human beings. I don't think we're anywhere near that as far as, but I don't see a problem, and maybe this comes from, I don't have some cherished culture that I'm trying to protect any more than I'm trying to protect humanity. And I don't know if there's any practical way to get there. Well, but I could certainly envision, and I don't mean just to go down like the Star Trek route, but a system where you don't have the border.
Yeah, but I spend a fair amount of time in this country, and one of the things I have observed is that not absolutely everybody is happy with your current president. Imagine if you were trying to elect a world leader in a borderless world, and who you might get.
Well,
you would actually get President Xi for life.
Yes, and I would actually, so I am a fan of other voting principles, a ranked voting system, and I'm a fan of other modes of...
You say you're in favor of a rigged voting system?
Ranked.
Oh, ranked.
Where you rank your potential candidates.
Thank God for that.
So that you...
It was an important thing to clarify.
Yeah. but also, I like the idea of a council with checks and balances. I like the way our constitutional system works with checks and balances, but I don't think you need a president. And actually, in many places, the leader isn't the leader.
Sure.
And so I think there's a number of options. Anyway, I don't want to delve off into fantasy land. Was there somebody over here? I can't see you. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Mr. Murray, in one of your discussions with Sam Harris, he expressed skepticism about you talking to Stefan Molyneux because of his sort of fetishism of IQ differences.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about that, about if you think there are limits on who you're willing to engage with or who you think it's appropriate to speak with.
Yeah. I love that question, actually. Thank you. There are people that I won't share a stage with again. There are two, at least, Ray Comfort and Saiten Burngate, that I've talked about publicly. There are probably people that I would not share a stage with, because my view on this is that I share stage all the time with people that I vehemently disagree with, and I share a stage from time to time with people that I somewhat disagree with. I mean, we're going to disagree on some stuff. I think that the counter to bad ideas and bad information is good ideas and better information. And I think that if an idea is bad and seems to be increasing in popularity, that it's almost a moral obligation to address it. And so I'm in favor of the conversations. There were people who didn't like the fact that I sat down with Jordan. There were people who didn't like the fact that I sat down with you. And that said, there are also cases where I have no need to sit down with somebody. For example, Richard Spencer. Now, he's a white nationalist, white supremacist, neo-Nazi, whatever label he's willing to use. I can get up and speak about human rights and equality without having to have him on stage to do it. And I can also fairly and honestly address the things that he said publicly without ever mentioning him and counter that. If it turns out that those ideas become popular and they're starting to increase, then maybe it is a good idea for me or for someone to get up and, share a stage and let's show the world.
Yeah.
I have a lot more confidence in let's put the information out there and have the discussions. I have a lot more confidence in the general public's ability to figure out what's going on. That's often shaken. The flat earthers, the people who are part of various what I consider cults or quasi-cults of personality. With regard to some people, it's incredibly frustrating. But I've gotten pretty good at dealing with frustrating things. And it's not like I'm not going to say there aren't any limits, but the limits are based on the potential good that it can do versus the potential harm of leaving it alone.
I couldn't agree more. That specific one, Sam picked me up on, I think I said at the time, it's pretty much the same view now. You have a conversation with somebody, it all seems to be pretty normal. They throw something in that isn't your thing, which I've had to find out a bit more about since, but I sort of ducked that. And Sam quite rightly noticed that I ducked it, because I just thought, well, why is he doing that? And now I'm a bit wiser about, as I say, the sort of warning sirens that go off about certain subjects. But I'm a great fan of Promiscuous Conversation, and there's one example I'd give in the UK. There's a guy called Anjem Chowdhury, who was a very prominent, led a tiny number of British Muslims, but a really very, very vehement and violent group. And 10 years ago or so, I was challenged through a debate by a student society in London with him, and I said I'd do it, and it turned out to be a front group and things, and there ended up being a kind of riot in the London streets, and the police asked me not to come, but I said, hell, it's my capital city, I'll come. In fact, not only did they duff up a colleague, but the police got there in time to get me out. But the bit we did have in the street was very, very helpful. Firstly, because I got him to say something I'd always thought he thought, and he said it in public. And secondly, that on the basis of that event, the terrorist group which he was leading was shut down by the British government, finally. And I know that the security services and the police were taking photos, and that in the 1 year after it, by about a year after that occasion, at least half a dozen of the people who were in front of me with Anjem Chowdhury had been sent to prison for trying to kill people. And I was very pleased that this event had smoked them out, and they'd appeared in public, and they shouted vile stuff at me and so on. It wasn't very pleasant to have 100 jihadis against me in the street, but it turned out to do an immense amount of good. And we met on subsequent occasions in slightly more studio-like environments. And again, you could show up what he thought, and just the fact that he just wasn't somebody engaging in normal dialogue. He was somebody who had a bunch of people behind him who he was encouraging to blow people up and assassinate them in Britain and around the world. And I'm very glad that he's now in prison. Not the only one of my enemies who's now in prison, incidentally, but that's another story.
And that's why I'm not his enemy. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Chris. I'll give this to either of you. Let me just first say that if you're looking for an example of a community to study where a fringe group has basically taken over the entire civil government, Curious Joel here in New York State would be an excellent example.
That's one of the towns I was talking about for filming for the documentary.
The question is, we seem to have moved as a country, our country, from healthy skepticism where you withhold acceptance of an assertion absent being presented with or finding appropriate evidence, to unhealthy skepticism where you reject basically any assertion that doesn't meet your existing framework of biases.
I have to interrupt you right there, just because I'm doing the Magic and Skepticism tour, and I will never call those healthy and unhealthy skepticism. One of them is skepticism, and the other one is cynicism, and they're different.
Fair enough. But then the cynicism is reinforced by the fact that people gravitate to TV channels, the blogs, the social structures that reinforce their belief structure. How do you challenge that? How do we, as a country, get back to a situation where reasonable, healthy skepticism is an appropriate way to make decisions?
Let me give you one example, if I may, which has been much on my mind recently. Russia. Okay. I've written a lot on foreign policy and international affairs, but Russia happens not to be a specialism of mine, but I'm interested in it. I have quite a lot of friends involved. And something remarkable has happened in recent years. There was a time in the last decade when it was really very hard to alert people to Vladimir Putin's nefarious activities. People didn't really care that much. They poisoned somebody on the sushi shop opposite where I was living at the time, but it was like, oh, well, that's the Russians. And so it was sort of hard to wake people up about that subject, about kleptocracy in Russia. And then we got to this weird stage where absolutely everything that happened that some people didn't like was blamed on Russia. Now it's really hard to persuade people that Russia is doing anything. They either say that it is controlling the entire world, every single plebiscite, every vote is organized by the Russians and so on, or they just believe that the FSB and its sister organizations are just sort of sitting around throwing paper darts at a wall somewhere in Moscow. And it's very, very hard to find people in between these two places who are willing to pay any attention to specific things that the Russians are doing and have been doing. So that when, for instance, sorry to be local about this, but when in this charming cathedral city of Salisbury, a former Russian spy and his daughter are attempted assassination with a really specific nerve agent, people are like, well, it could have been the British government. Oh yeah, the British government's very keen to poison people in cathedral cities with nerve agents. Yeah, they're always doing that.
But if they wanted to blame it on the Russians, that'd be the perfect way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a sort of, it looks like a false flag, And I didn't, as I say, and I'm not a Russia expert, so I don't have time to look at every single issue of it. I'm just aware that we're losing the reasonable place in which a reasonable discussion would be had, and that's just on one issue.
I think the best thing about this is that whatever the solution is, it's already started in part because we're now more aware and talking about. This question comes up almost everywhere we go, or at least me. I'm assuming everybody's concerned about this, or at least a good chunk of people are. And as that concern increases, you'll get people who start to recognize, hey, yeah, the algorithms on Facebook are feeding me all the shit that I want.
Right.
And all the stuff that I clicked on that I liked, and this isn't necessarily true. Or I've been only watching Fox News, or only watching MSNBC, or only watching CNN. I watch all of them,
Yes.
One of them to laugh at, and be terrified by, because, I like horror movies. I think the fact that we're becoming aware of this is, for me, a positive sign. There is no easy solution. There are probably people who are going to go to their grave. I've said before that people would ask, how long is it going to be before, religion goes away? And I was like, as sad as it is, I think a generation or two might have to die off because there are some people who just aren't going to change their mind. I think that some of that's going to be true for misinformation about politics and political regimes, misinformation about cultural phenomenon and people's preferences, how they override facts. But the fact that we're talking about it is step one. I'm not going to be able to give you a solution at all. I took a test. This is so sad. I took a test on Facebook that was kind of like, how insulated are you? And I figured, okay, this will tell me how much of a bubble I'm in on Facebook, which was silly of me because it was just another Facebook click thing. And it had questions about movies and politics and all kinds of things. It was wide-ranging, and I'm not an expert at that sort of polling at all, but I'm also not clueless. I'm pretty sure it wouldn't have mattered what I would have clicked. It told me that I was in the least bubbly area of anybody, the percentile that they tested. And that's when I stopped clicking on any sort of poll stuff like that. The other thing is, I joked one time, the solution is to delete Facebook. But I think the solution may be to reset Facebook, dump all your friends, dump all your history about it. You don't get to do this, by the way. Facebook would actually need to do this. And it's not just Facebook, it happens everywhere. But I think sometimes, people worry about the reset. Well, this isn't like I'm resetting my life. This is resetting, my online presence. This shouldn't be that much more traumatic than changing my email address, which for a lot of people, I've had the same one for 15 years or so. But talking about it is a start, and people caring about it enough to see that there is a problem that we should work towards a solution for. That's step 2. Apart from that, I can't tell you, which was the short answer I should have given at the start of this.
Oh, hello, good night.
Hi.
I'm a fan from Brazil. It's a great pleasure to see you both in person.
Thank you.
My question is in regard to Jordan Peterson, especially because he's being so prominent in the media on YouTube. His book is one of the best sellers worldwide. He's giving a lot of talks. And although I admire Mr. Peterson's views in many issues, when it comes to religion, it's quite disturbing for me, for being an atheist and everything. And I would like to hear both of you opinion on the question, since Jordan Peterson is so influential, because he believes in God and he has these religious beliefs, is this a threat to the skeptical movement way of thinking?
Is it a threat to the skeptical movement? No, I think, well, all right, this is going to be glib and rude, but at least it's honest. I don't think it's skeptics that are actually agreeing with Jordan, or at least not people who are applying skepticism. The thing is, skepticism is essentially, as the last gentleman said, withholding your assent to an idea. It is, I am not convinced and will not be convinced until there's sufficient evidence to warrant that. That's it. It's not saying this is nonsense. I don't run around, in many cases, there's a line that Richard used that's from somebody else, and I'm going to butcher it, but it was something about your idea isn't even wrong. That it's so muddled and confused that it isn't even wrong. Essentially, it's incoherent and unfalsifiable. I don't know how big of a threat this is. What I've been trying to do, I did the event, and I know Douglas is going to do some events. Sam's done. I think Sam's got like 3 or 4 events with him. And hopefully over the course of those, we can get to some clarity about. Sometimes I'm not convinced I even remotely understand what he's advocating for, because I'll be honest, I don't care about metaphorical truths at all. I care about reality. Now, as I mentioned before, I'm fine with the idea that you can inspire people through this stuff. But I can't tell you how much of a danger it is to anything, because there are fans who've written me who say, oh, I'm a big fan of yours and I'm a big fan of Jordan Peterson's. I couldn't wait for you guys to sit down and talk. And I wasn't familiar with Jordan, so I kept saying, what is it about him or his ideas that you are a fan of? And most of them didn't answer. There were a couple that answered with something that I still didn't grasp, and one of them was pretty much, I just like the way he talks about stuff, and he's really good on psychology. And I'm not here to psychoanalyze him or get in his head, but based on what he said, I don't know how much danger there is. It may be that this is a softening of religion. It may be a completely different type of reform. I just wish that I have a difficult time looking at someone who's an apologist about something that's unclear. Because if a word can mean anything to anybody, then it means nothing. And so if you say, I believe in God, and you and everybody else have a completely different, God is real, and you have different definitions of God and is and real, I don't know where you go from there.
Yeah, I agree with some of that. Look,
Then you're partially right.
And I'm partially right. I think that he's done several things, and is doing several things which are very important. I don't know if one's allowed to still quote Woody Allen, but let me just try. Some years ago, Woody Allen gave an interview in which he was asked about whether he minded not having gone to university, and he said he had, because although he'd spent his life reading, and amazingly wide reader and a wide knowledge, he said he felt that it was like a bridge. He had that bit and he had that bit, but what he hadn't ever got was that. And I knew exactly what he meant. Like, I don't have the arc that you can get if you've studied the whole of, I don't know, whether it's literature or law or whatever. You know how you get to there because you came from it, and you know the whole route over the bridge. My view is that a lot of young people, which is who Jordan's mainly speaking to, I think, are people who just, they don't know, like, what is this tradition or this civilization or this culture or this art or this philosophy or any of it. They've been, maybe it's worse if they've been to university these days, but everything's been deconstructed. They're told there is no core idea, no core curriculum, all this sort of thing. Everything's going to be taken in its own context. And the world is befuddling to them because it's been presented as more befuddling even than it is. And he's trying to give these people, and I think pretty successfully is, an idea of what that whole bridge might be. And the second thing I'll just say very quickly is that he is speaking to a thing which I've written about quite a lot as well, which is this sense, again, I don't want to bang on about the Europe aspect of this, but a German philosopher, Jürgen Habermas, who I quote in my book, wrote what for me was a very important essay some years ago called The Awareness of What's Missing, where he writes about a friend's funeral who is an atheist who leaves instruction that there is to be a funeral in a church. There's no amen to be said, and there are to be no priests in robes. And Habermas, in basically his most coherent work, in my view, sums this up as the fact that he says his friend has recognized the loss of faith and has also recognized that we have not yet come up with anything that remotely goes into its place. Now, lots of atheists say we don't want to fill that place. We don't want to come up with new religions or replacements for religion and so on, fine. But that there is a vacuum there, I think, has to be recognized. And my own view is that there is a deep, deep longing that people will have with or without religious answers. And that to pretend that that is not there is a very big mistake, whether you're a believer or a non-believer. And he appears to be speaking to those deeps. And I, at any rate, think that that is a great service. I have disagreements with some of the ways in which he answers that. But this, a final thought, I mean, this is, all the time, there's an interpretation of what's happened with atheism over the last couple of decades, which is that, broadly speaking, in the 2000s, people were so worried about, among other things, post 9/11 and so on and so forth, that it had a great run at running straight at the thing. Did a terrific job, Hitch and others, amazing thing, but that we are in something that is following that success at the moment, by which I mean that running at the target worked to some considerable degree. But there are a set of questions now which we have to be engaged in, which are slightly further down the road. And I think he's involved in that territory as much as or more than anyone. And I'd see no other plausible people at the moment.
I think I agree with you that he's filling a gap that some people experience. I just don't agree that there's necessarily a gap, because I'm happy with taking the good wherever I find it, including within religious doctrines, and getting rid of the bad. And so the concerns that people have about the vacuum portion, everyone that I've been presented with, I have, at least for me, and it may not apply for everybody else, I don't see a vacuum there.
Right.
I have a perfectly acceptable moral foundation absent religion. I think that, and a matter of fact, not only do I think that the vacuum is something that religions have created, but amplified. They've done a disservice to people in how they deal with death by not acknowledging that it's an inevitable part of life. That if you realize or are convinced that this is the only life you know you're going to get, you might treat people differently the first time around rather than thinking you could make up for it. It was said once that religions poison you and then offer you the cure. And I think that it's more accurate to say, and I've said this before, that religions convince you that you're poisoned and then offer you the homeopathic remedy. And it turns out that there was no poison, that you weren't a bad fallen creature, that you that your fears about death or loneliness or whatever, these are just the facts of the universe. The universe doesn't care about us, so we have to care about us. And that's where secular humanism comes in. So I agree that atheism doesn't offer anything to fill those gaps, but secular humanism does. But I also agree that there are plenty of people who aren't going to accept that, and he may be filling a gap. And on that front, I'm a little worried, not that the gap is being filled by something that is terrible or particularly dangerous, but I see some things that are cult-like, and there are people who almost view him as a messianic figure. They don't know what to do with their life, but he can tell them.
Sure, but look, that can happen to a range of people.
Sure.
I mean, I remember at the end of his life, Hitch was concerned about the fact that some people, I mean, I remember there were people like who asked Christopher to officiate at their weddings.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a nightmare. You know, and I mean, obviously, it started to worry him. It would worry anyone. I'm not worrying a bloody wedding.
I did 2 weddings. I'll never do another.
No, I mean, it's so I mean, I wouldn't blame Jordan for that. It can come towards anyone who is presenting a comprehensive, deeply thought through, even if they're slightly wrong, you think at times, but a coherent explanation of what we're doing. And I mean, I've sensed this for years, that young people in particular, it's like, what are we doing?
Well, I'm not blaming him for it.
Sure.
I'm just talking about the effect that I see.
Got time for another?
Yes.
Hi, Douglas.
Hi.
I know you talked about your rejection of labels. I do think you have some conservative views, even by U.S. standards.
Sure.
As someone who's center-left, though, I find myself largely agreeing with many of them, and even the few I don't, it makes me pause for a moment. Voices like yours, I think, are surprisingly rare, particularly on the right in media today. And I think part of it is just intellectuals and more articulate folks do not want to risk having to break through the nuance of why they're not xenophobic or racist or hold bad views, and they'd rather not volunteer that information, leaving more extreme voices to fill that gap. So you talked about bridging divides and getting out of the bubble. How do you achieve that if maybe one side has a steeper price to pay for expressing their views than another?
Good question. I broadly think that all this has been made infinitely worse by social media, which is one of the reasons why I don't engage on it. As I said to Matt before, I mean, I wouldn't go out into the street and invite people to shout names at me, and then, like, if I didn't hear properly, go over to them and ask them to do it clearer. And in the same way, I don't seek out the sort of mad burlesque of the debate, or what passes for debate on social media. But it's clearly exacerbated because people on, I think, all political sides are increasingly behaving like trolls. So, I mean, you see it all the time. I mean, take abortion. I've got pretty typical European views about abortion. Okay, but when you hear people talking about abortion as if, there was one like shout your abortion a little while ago, like at least concede this is a really important moral question which we have to think about seriously, and you might come to one decision, either or the other. We might be pro-choice like me, but don't just try to piss off people who are pro-life. I think pro-life, by the way, I don't like the saying, it's like the other side is pro-death, but anyhow. But you see this all over the place at the moment, on almost every issue. It's like, the people Lena Dunham says this, so I'm going to say this. Donald Trump said this, so I'm going to run this way. And it's just clearing out all the mainstream. I gave the example of Russia, but I mean, you could do it on almost anything. People that seem to be forming political views, not because they've reasoned themselves into them, but because they want to piss off people they hate. And I just think we have to find a way to do better than this. And it comes back to this thing about not making claims about your opponents that are just demonstrably untrue. I mean, I have this with Sam. Like, somebody said that a conversation Sam Harris and I had was like Nazism or something. Like, you gotta be the most fucking ignorant person in the world to think that Sam Harris, the West Coast yoga-doing, meditating liberal, is a jackbooted Nazi, okay? And I make no claim about myself, but you gotta know nothing to say that. You gotta have not seen anything, or been anywhere, or read anything. Unless what you're trying to do is to clear out the decent liberal ground, okay? And that's what some people are trying to do. I see it all the time at the moment. It's like, we want to get rid of the voices who are plausible, so we'll make totally illegitimate claims about them being Nazis, fascists, white supremacists, and so on, in the hope that we'll throw enough mud at them that they're no longer in the debate. I say, again, you have no imagination of where this goes, because if you've heard people, this is another thing we've all seen all the time. When the mainstream media can run roughshod over somebody's entire life and career, and you see it happen, you become very doubting about the next times you see it happen with people who you don't know about. And one of my things about this is that if you've heard 99 people illegitimately described as Nazis, it's highly likely that you won't believe the 100th time somebody calls somebody a Nazi, and it's possible the 100th time it's a proper Nazi. I saw this once in London, so I won't go on. I saw this once in London at a debate where a really stupid person I knew was sitting beside me in a debate, and somebody stood up and asked a question. And another friend of mine, who was a Labour MP at the time, said, "It's the Nazi lady." Okay. It was somebody who I won't name, but friend of David Irving's, this person he pointed to. I read a piece by this really stupid person in the Telegraph 2 days later saying, "It's appalling. Everyone's calling each other Nazis these days when they disagree." No, she is a Nazi. She actually is a Nazi. But it was like she'd heard it so many times that she didn't believe it when somebody said, "Oh no, that's the well-known Nazi." And that's sort of where we are. And it worries the hell out of me. I mean, the continent I'm from, we've got some Nazis around, okay? They're like, a Golden Dawn in Greece is about as thuggish a fascist street movement as you can get in 21st century Europe. If you claim that there's basically no difference between Golden Dawn and Sam Harris,
I think the only thing I'll I'm tempted to add nothing, but there's one thing that ties to your question, and no offense to Douglas, but I heard him do it, we all do it. But I keep cautioning people against it anyway, even though I'm prone to it, so it's worth getting out there. Argue honestly and stop pretending that you can read people's minds.
yes.
When I'm as pro-choice as you are going to find. I've debated it. I will call the other side anti-choice, and I will demolish their views that I think are actually harmful. But my wife and some of her friends had previously said, the anti-choice people, they just want to control women's bodies, they just want to control sex, they just want to punish women for having a vagina. A uterus, sorry. Boy, I can't believe I got that wrong.
It's not my area.
Yeah. So cheers. And I said, don't do that. What you should do is say, exactly what the truth is, which these individuals want to implement policies that would have the effect of controlling sex and making women slaves to their biology, etc. That doesn't have to be their motivation. Their motivation could be, we want to make sure that every living thing lives forever. And if you misrepresent what their actual motivation is, they get to dismiss you immediately. In the same way that when Jordan Peterson or somebody tells me that I don't actually not believe a God exists, I get to dismiss them because I know me enough to know that they're wrong about that. And so if you stop pretending you can read people's minds and stop pretending you know what their motivations are and instead talk about what they're actually doing and the consequences of those actions, I think you will get a lot farther.
There's a lady there.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, Sarah. I'd just like to say I'm Jewish. I do believe in God, but I don't think that God it discriminates against atheists because He made you guys for a reason. Then number two, I would like to address the you bring up the Blitz. Circuitously or, obliquely. I would like to ask, first of all, as an atheist who speaks on religion regularly, weekly, do you find that that's a substitute for ministry? Your family is very strong in ministry. And number two, if you did not have your ministry, what would you have a passion for that kept you going? And what would you do as a vocation?
Is this for me? Because
I think so. You
This is for
first.
you and for you.
I was going to say I didn't bring up the Blitz at all.
You,
So
I know that your father was a Presbyterian minister. Yes.
Not a minister, no.
He was, but you were.
He was a congregant. But,
Okay, I didn't know it.
Sure.
There was your Wikipedia. Is incorrect?
yeah,
not for the first time.
Yes.
the short version is I'd have a passion for all the same things that I have a passion for. As far as I can tell, I mean, obviously I can't rewind the clock and remove my religious upbringing and everything else. I'd probably have a passion for much the same things I do, for learning and educating and magic and my hobbies. But the values that I have, the interesting thing for me was when I found my way out of the religious beliefs, I had to take an inventory of my entire life and why I believed what I believed. Hey, if previously killing people was wrong because God said so, well, does that mean I can kill people? It turns out, really easy answer, no. And there are good reasons. I'd rather not die, you'd rather not die. It's probably in our best interest to make sure we discourage that sort of thing. So you can have completely pragmatic, even selfish reasons to reach those conclusions. So what about psychopaths? Well, I mean, you don't get to point to the exception. They're not going to have a reason whether there's a God or not. The better question is, why did God make psychopaths? But I would...
That's a question for psychology, whether he did or not.
Well, so anyway, I would have a passion for much of the same things. My passion isn't let me destroy religion across the world. It is to... And because I'm not saying there is no God and religions are wrong, I'm saying I'm not convinced there is a God, and every time throughout history somebody's tried to argue for one, it's been logically fallacious and without evidential support.
Personal faith without judgment is not support?
I'm sorry?
Personal faith without judgment of others is not support?
Personal faith without judgment of...
The person who just asked the question about religion dying out, it reminds me an awful lot of Oprah's idea about, a bunch of old white people have to die out before the racism is gone. It's a bit of a eugenic solution.
No, it's not eugenics. I'm just saying that we're going to have to wait. I'm saying it's going to take time, that there are some people who... But
what if it never dies because people like me teach our children?
Well, it may never die. Matter of fact, I don't think that it will die. I think it'll just be diminished to the point where it's no more relevant than flat earthers. But
I mean, maybe I could just chip in to say that I don't spend all my time arguing about religion or telling people to drop their faith or anything like that.
True.
But I mean, you asked what else one would do, and I, at any rate, feel rather resentful about this. Not towards you, but I feel rather resentful about the amount of time I have to spend on this. Having been brought up in the Christian tradition, and I mean, I don't hate it, I don't loathe it, far from it. But I resent the fact that having, broadly speaking, managed to see the church's role in society reduced to the position which I think it should be in, I feel resentful that now in the 21st century I have to spend so much time reading hadith and so on. And I think of all the things I would do, and it answers your question. What I would be doing is doing what I did from the beginning, before this all diverted me, which would be concentrating on my first love, which was literature and art, and writing about that. And the only reason I don't get so much time to do that is because I don't think that the conditions for that to continue to be done are satisfactorily safe at the moment.
So you believe
But the
that
moment,
that Hashem and Allah are the same thing?
I believe in what?
Do you believe that Hashem and Allah are the same God? Because you just talked about hadith and not about, say, Talmud.
Well, no, because, I mean, I can assure you, madam, that if people were chopping off people's heads in my country and citing the Talmud, I'd be reading a lot more of the Talmud and of Jewish law, and I'd be engaging myself far more in that. It's just that, you know, in the last year, it's been multiple times that people have, for instance, walked across London Bridge slashing at women's throats, shouting, "This is for Allah." So I find myself unable to spend as much time on poetry as I'd like. But, you know, it's a frustration I have, which I hope to get over someday. So when you start being able to read essays from me on literature rather more, you'll know the world's safe.
Not all believers, hashtag.
Do we have time for one more? And then...
Actually, that has to be the last question, they're telling me. So thank you, and thank everybody else. Thank you guys so much for coming out tonight.
Thank you. That was a great pleasure. Thank you, man.
Thank you very much.
That was a great pleasure.
Round of applause for Douglas and Pangburn Philosophy for putting this on. We'll see you out there somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.